Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Todd's Inheritance. My name is Fran Taylor and I'm Vice President of the Todd's Inheritance folks. And today we are continuing our lecture series that we do once a month. And we're very happy to have Mr. Peter Morrill, who is the Cultural Resource, Architectural Development Person for DNR. How's that? Yeah, that's a mouthful. It's going to be a great talk today on the history of the house and some of the insights looking into it. If you've ever been here before, you know we've left pieces of wall out, left pieces of ceiling out, and you can just look to see some of the construction techniques and materials that they used. So without further ado, we'll welcome Peter.
Great.
Thanks.
Yay.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks, Fran. I appreciate the invitation. I honestly had a lot of fun trying to wrap my head around this great layer cake of a house. I mean, we got a lot of periods going on here, a lot of substantial changes over the years. So our goal today is to just try to run through some of the architectural development of the house. So we've got some photos here, and hopefully at the end, it's not a huge group, we can maybe do a walk around and it's kind of more fun to see things in person. So, I guess a little bit about me. I work for the Department of Natural Resources. I'm an architectural historian. Primarily, I manage our residential curatorship program. So, like the Todd farmhouse across the way, we have tenants in there, and then the originally Todd House up the road also has some curators in our program as well. So I'm not intimately involved in the day-to-day running of this place, but Fran has invited me out a few times, and I've really enjoyed getting to look around this place. It's a really spectacular resource. So we're going to try to track this through the years here, and I'll be completely honest, I don't totally understand this house yet, but I'll tell you what I do know and what I don't know, and we can all talk about it and go from there. So, I did not do any original archival research on this project, but we do have some great resources already out there. An article prepared by Drusilla Knoll back in 1997 had a really detailed chain of title and some good archival work. We also had a nice article from Kathy Lee Liston in 1997 as well, and then in 2003, Friends of Todd's Inheritance hired John Milner and Associates to create what's called a Historic Structures Report. And they relied pretty heavily on those two previous articles, and then they did their own architectural evaluations. So, preface that with, there's not a whole lot of new information here beyond some observations, and I've been trying to kind of correlate this historical record with the physical fabric that we see in the building. So, I'm not going to go all into Todd family genealogy. You all probably know that way better than I do. I'm not going to talk a lot about the War of 1812. I've got a great stock image of British soldiers burning things. But that's kind of where our story is going to start. So, of course, 1814, the British invade Baltimore. And while Fort McHenry is being bombarded by the fleet, a landing group comes up North Point. And at some point, the Todd House gets burned by those troops. So the question we want to ask is, what happened to that original Todd House? Is there any part of it left? Family lore has always said that the current Todd House that we're sitting in now was built on the foundations of that earlier Todd House. So I wanted to look through and see where we can combine the historical record with some of the bits and pieces we see here to make sense of what actually happened after this house gets burned in 1814. So, most of what we're going to be looking at is in the basement. There is not a lot left above the ground, so all of the plans that you'll be seeing in here are basement plans. And these were drawn up by Peter Morrill back in probably the early 2000s, and I've since traced over him, so shout out to him for the measurements. But this is the basement plan as the Todd House exists today. And there are a few interesting things down here. So the first thing is this big section of stone on the east gable end of the house. It rises up about this high. I've got a couple of photos in here, and it is just totally unrelated to the current chimney stacks. Now, they're built on top of it, but it's clearly from something else. So there have been some folks have posited that this is in fact part of that original Todd House foundation. We also have stone under the walls on the north, the south, and the west walls of the current brick house. Again, that's nothing out of the ordinary. Very frequently you're going to lay a damp course of stone and then put your brick masonry on top of that. But there are some interesting layers to that. We also have, in the crawl space here, Fran was kind enough to let me go crawling around there a few weeks ago. And this is kind of the most interesting part of this house as far as understanding the development and its early history. And it's a shame we're not going to go crawling into there today. I took a few photos for you. But we have an interesting stone return here that I think has helped me shed at least a little bit of understanding of what's going on here. So here are a few photos. So up at the top here, it's that arrow pointing back. This is that big stone foundation that looks like a fireplace foundation on the east wall of the house. And then you can see the current house's chimneys coming up off of that. But again, it's oversail on the edge here. They're unrelated structures, though they are helping each other out. Here we've got stone foundation under the north wall. If you just looked at that photo, you say, nothing to see here. Pretty typical. But when we come under the L, the stone foundation continues under this kitchen wing, and then we get a return. And these stones are mortared into each other, and it makes a right angle. Now, most of it is missing, but you get a little bit of a chunk there. So this was intriguing to me, because a lot of this is going to be based on some measurements we have in the historical record. So that caught my eye, so I brought my tape measure back and ran it back up to the end of the main block of the house to see where it fell. And then we can compare it to some of the historical documents. So here we have the damage claim that was submitted by the Todd family in 1845. So, a full 20 years after this happens. And they described the house as a 2-story frame house measuring 35 foot by 40 foot. Now, some folks, like Mill looks at it, and the Milner and Associate folks look at it, and they say, well, the current house, it measures 30 foot by 27 foot. That's nowhere near these measurements. We don't know what that stone thing is in the basement, but we don't think it's the earlier Todd house. But if you go back a little bit further and look at the 1798 direct tax, they describe Thomas Todd's heirs. Thomas Todd dies in 1798, right before this tax record is taken. They described a 2-story frame dwelling house measuring 36 by 30 feet. So, if we come back to our plan, there's 30 foot exactly on the gable end. And I measured about 37 foot. Now again, I'm measuring between some newer walls and a crawl space, so it's probably not the most accurate measurement. But I think this makes me reasonably confident that, yes, in fact, that stone foundation that you see on the ground floor is that original Todd house that was burnt in 1814. And that small return that we see under the kitchen wing here is, in fact, the old west wall of the original house. And then later on, we'll see how it progresses from there. But the big question is, here's our 2-story frame house, 36 by 30, or a 2-story frame house, 35 by 40. Which is it? I don't know. I think the 1798 direct tax is maybe a little bit more accurate. It matches what we're seeing on the ground. And this is an assessor doing it with a notebook in the field. This is people trying to get money from the government 20 years after the event happened. I would tend to put a little bit more faith in that first number.
We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't extend it.
So the question is, do they remember incorrectly? Are they trying to inflate sizes on things? We could go around in circles on that for a while. The other thing that I was kind of interested in is, and there's they note 4 1.5-story log houses on the property that also get burned. And here we also have 4 outhouses. But again, the dimensions in the damage report claim are like a full 10 feet bigger than here. And it's like, between 1790 and 1814, did they really replace all 4 of those houses? I don't know. So I think there's some discrepancies all the way down this list. But I'm reasonably confident that, yes, in fact, we've got our foundation and the new house is on the original Todd House foundation. So let's move forward in history a bit. So in purple there, we've got our original Todd House foundation, and then we have what I'm going to refer to as period 1 of the house that we're sitting in today. And that's outlined in blue. And that is the bulk of the house that you see here today. So it's the main block, which is a double pile side hall plan. You've got your 2 parlors, you've got a central hall that runs front to back, and then we have a kitchen wing on the side. Now this is where we start getting a little bit tricky here. And I don't have all the answers, but we'll try. Here's some elevations to show you what the exterior might have looked like. If you go outside where the cross gables are now, you'll see this nice corbelled brick. That's the original corbelled brick cornice from this period 1 structure that runs the whole width of the house. Likely would have just had a plain gable roof that you see, and then of course your kitchen wing on the side. The only other major difference here is the stair window there. They had a window set down to light the landing of the stair. And if we walk around later, and I've got a couple slides as well, you can see where that window has since been moved in later periods. But this is the way the house likely would have looked just after this period is built, and we'll get into the timing of this a little bit later on. So, we're going back in the crawl space here. So we're looking at the kitchen wing under here, and we've got another anomaly. So, remember before I mentioned that we've got a stone foundation that continues under, that the brick sits on. Well, about 2/3 of the way back of the current kitchen wing, the stone stops abruptly, and we get another right angle turn. So this is the end west wall of another period of kitchen wing. Some folks have posited that this is some sort of temporary building that was constructed for the Todd family to live in after the original was built. If we look around more though, the brick that is supporting this kitchen wing is toothed in nicely to the brick of this main block. So I'm of the opinion that it is contemporaneous, that is the kitchen wing to the new house, and it is not a separate dwelling. So where the Todds are living between the time the house burns and when the new house is built, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't think they built a little temporary thing and then added the big house to it. Whether they have another small house on the property or are living with neighbors or families, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm fairly confident that this is all one period of construction going up. So again, we talked about the stair window. You can see very clearly the patches in the masonry from that stair window at the landing getting moved up later, and we'll talk a little bit more about why a little later. And then we're going to get into what I'll be calling period 2. Now, period 2 and period 3 may be at the same time. I can't tell you definitively yet, but we'll get to that. This is a total revamping of this kitchen wing. So they're extending it past where that stone foundation was you saw in the previous picture. It's coming around, and this is supporting the chimney that you see in the kitchen wing today. The interesting part here is I don't think that we have any piece of our period 1 kitchen wing left beyond that foundation. All of the framing in this is consistent. So what happens here, I don't know. Generally, kitchen wings are not getting replaced. You know, you spend your money on gussying up, retrimming your big house, but the kitchen remains fairly static, maybe updated cook stove or something like that. But a total rebuild of a wing without doing anything in the main block is unusual, to say the least. But that is what the physical evidence seems to be telling me at this point. Again, you know, we talked about the end in the stone there. And here's elevations of what we likely were looking like in period 2. So again, the main block, nothing's really changed here, but we're getting this larger kitchen wing that appears basically like you have now. A few things to note that A gives us some information into there originally being a kitchen wing, and then also this being a replacement. This is a close-up of the door lintel over the doorway from the main block into the kitchen wing. And you can see it's all scarified with an adze to give it texture. What this does is allows plaster to key to the stone. So when they plaster, to the wood I should say. So when they plaster in here, it'll stick to the brick and to the wood, and it's a nice finished surface. If this was an exterior lintel, you would not be doing that. It would have brick jack arches like you see on the outside. So this is always built to have a passage out this end of the house that is an interior space, not exterior. So that is kind of confirmation about our period one wing being there from the get-go. The other piece, and this is going to be kind of hard to see, but here's a stud for the partition wall of our existing kitchen wing, and we've got a little piece of finished plaster right in line with that stud wall, which is telling me that we had finished space here before that wall goes in later on. And you can see the thicker 19th century plaster behind that is associated with the kitchen wing that you see today. So that, I believe, is one of the last little remnants of interior finishes we have from our period one kitchen wing. And again, you wouldn't be getting plaster behind that stud if that's there from the get-go, unless we've totally rebuilt our wing. So again, a few photos. Now, one thought I had, now remember I said totally demolishing and replacing a service space like that is unusual. So I thought, well, maybe they just popped the top on it and extended it to make it bigger. But unfortunately, the framing is all consistent. If you take a close look at the post that's right here, it runs the full 1.5 stories all the way to the top, so it's not been joined or enlarged. This is all one period of construction. What you see is what you get. And I do think it's the second kitchen that was on this house. Another reason I think this is a later piece, we'll be looking at some of the lath in the house. So here's a photo of the back of the wall on the second floor here. And this is what we call ribbon or split lath. So they're taking log rounds, cut to whatever length they want, and they're riving them down with usually a froe. To make these little strips of wood. So you can see the kind of horizontal striations on it. They're all irregular sizes. This is indicative of how lath is made from the very earliest days of construction up until right about the 1850s. We switch over to what is used the rest of the century into the 20th century, which is sawn lath. So this is cut on a circular sawmill, so you can see these kind of angled striations on it. It's from a circular saw blade. It's all very regular. You can start seeing some of this in the 1840s, but it's very unusual, and you'll still see split lath used into the 1850s. So the fact that this main block of the house is getting split lath, again, that's pointing us to our second quarter of the 19th century, and then we're getting our sawn lath in the wing here. That's putting us pretty firmly in the mid-19th century. So I would hesitate to go any earlier than the 1840s, and more likely 1850s or so. So, on to period 3. Now, before I said my period 2 kitchen wing change, this may all be one period, but this is the Victorianization of the house. So, whether the kitchen wing happens before or in line with this, we just don't know at this point, but they're not happening too far from each other in the timeline. But the big changes here are happening on the main block. So, here you can see the remnants of our original corbelled cornice, which still exists, and you can even see it hiding under the brackets of the new roof. But they scab on rafter tails to end to carry the eaves of the roof down past that old-fashioned corbelled cornice. They're adding nice detailed scroll-sawn blocks, and then they're putting these very fashionable cross gables in. I mean, every farmhouse in Maryland in the mid-19th century is all about these Gothic revival cross gables. So you see lots of early houses getting retrofitted with these. And then, of course, your newer frame houses being built purposefully with them. We get these great round-headed windows in their new cross gables. They put new round-headed windows in their gable ends. And then we get back to our window. So they've added these great porches on both the north and the south facade, which, of course, would run right into your window lighting or stair landing. So that is necessitating them raising that window on the north facade up. And that's when you get that patch in the wall. It's just a very pragmatic thing. They want a porch. That's how you accommodate a porch on the house. There are some changes in the attic as well. Originally, you would have gone up the stairs to a finished landing, and then the rest of the attic was unfinished space. When they're doing the cross gables, they're gaining extra height, and they actually go in and cut out all the original collar ties in the roof and move them up to get more head space up there. So then they're putting in 2 nicely finished rooms in the attic. So you're really increasing your floor space in the house in this mid-19th century period. Then we'll go quickly into period 4, and that is where we're sitting now. And there's not a whole lot of mystery about this part. It's pretty definitively built somewhere between 1901 and 1908. The property's being transferred. right in 1907. So whether Todd Jr. or Sr. builds it, I don't know that we really know the answer to that, and maybe some Todd family folks could ask around, but we've got a pretty tight 5 to 10 year period on when this portion of the house is constructed. And so that gets us pretty well to the present day. So here's a little recap of what we got here. We've got our period 1 block. We've got our period 2 kitchen extension and replacement of the entire kitchen wing. We've got our period 3 Victorianization, including our new porches. And then period 4, our dining room addition here with this great bay window. So, some numbers here. And again, this is going back to some of the research that the previous folks had done, mostly based on tax assessments of the property. So in 1798, the place is assessed at $500. Now this is just the cost of improvements, which is going to include your house, your barns, any structure on the property. So you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's at least a good baseline for how much the property is worth. So 1798, it's worth $500, and that assessor even notes the place is going to ruin. A good bit of money. We get to 1813, clearly no improvements have been made in 1813 because the value is now sunk down to $300. 1814, of course, happens. 1818 comes around and we're now down to $150. So I think there are some folks that have, posited that, this is getting built right after the house is built, 1816, 1817. I think these tax assessments refute that. There's no way you're still losing value and have just built a brand new house here on the property. And then you get to 1823 and it's getting really dire. We're down to $87. Now there is economic downturns going on in the 1820s. It was not a fun time economically, so that plays into it, but that seems to show a continual decrease in value of this property that's not reflecting any big improvements here. But 1833, look at that, we're jumping up to $400. So I'm pretty confident that we're getting our period 1 building sometime between 1823 and 1833. And that would jive with all of the physical finishes we see in the house, the trim, the stairs, the lath, the nails that are used in it. It's all cut nails. It works very well for that 1820s period. 1836, we're still sitting right at about $400. And then in 1841, we're jumping up to $1,000. Now, whether this is farm improvements, if this is maybe our new kitchen, I don't know. I find 1841 a little bit early for the construction types that we're seeing here. So that one's I can't really explain that $600 jump in just a few years there. So that's something we'll have to do some more research on, but kind of interesting. And then in 1853, that damage claim that was submitted way back in 1845 is finally paid out by the federal government to the tune of $4,315. Now, could that have gone into 1850s? Sounds great for our kitchen wing based on the physical fabric. Are they making an improvement campaign then? Some other folks have posited maybe this is around the time that we're starting to get our cross gable and some of our Victorian improvements, or within a few years after. 50s is maybe a little bit early for those kind of stylistic improvements, but not totally out of the realm of reason. So, to summarize here, we've got, sure enough, portions of our 18th century house surviving under the main block, and that's that stone foundation. It's about all that's left, all the way over to this little return that we find in the crawl space. And unfortunately, I have to back up a little bit. Archaeological work was done by Milner and Associates in the early 2000s, and they had picked up on this change in the stone to brick here, and had opened some test units here, and did find the stone return. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything in the middle, which either means I'm totally wrong and there was not a cooking fireplace there, or it means they were pretty good at robbing the stone out for later construction periods. But they did find another return up here. Unfortunately, they did not open a unit where this small return is. So I think a lot more answers to our questions still lie under that crawl space. And I would say if there's ever a chance to get a grant to do some more archaeological investigations under there, I would 100% advise doing that. And the property generally, I think there's a lot more information that can be found underground. Our period 1 again is our blue section here, so standard hall parlor plan, or a side hall plan, double pile with the kitchen wing on the side. Our period 2, maybe period 3, we're looking at, before 1841, maybe, but unlikely. After 1853, probably more likely. And it could well correspond, like I said, with our period 3 Victorian additions, the cross gables, the porches, the new windows. And then, of course, our period 4, circa 1907. So, in my short time, this is kind of what I've pieced together on this place, and I'd love to hear people refute anything or talk more about it, but I appreciate you sitting through, and like I said, if we've got time in a smaller group, I'd be glad to walk through and point out some of the things that we've looked at in this presentation. But I'll open it up to questions.
I have a question. When one of the older Todds were here one day, that little room straight across from us, which is now an old bathroom, they said that was like a refrigeration room.
Okay.
Would that fit in anywhere? Like they said they kept food in there. It was one of the old Todds were here.
So
they said when they were kids, it was like
unusual to see brick nogging on interior walls. That's usually reserved for exterior walls. So nogging is referring to a frame building with brick infill like that in between the studs. So it's effectively a frame building, but the brick is generally getting inserted as a type of insulation and sound dampening, and it just solidifies the house. It's unusual to see on interior walls. So if they are using that as some sort of cold storage or even a small porch at some point, that could make sense. But again, I've not looked at, the inside's all covered, so I haven't been able to see any of the framing in there to know much more about it. Yes?
Well, so you may know, as I may have introduced myself, I'm Ruth, and Todd is my maiden name.
So they can speak a little louder.
Oh, sorry. I'm Ruth Todd Boggs. I'm a 12th generation Todd from right here. Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I can't wait for all of my family to see this. I have to admit, I'm like sitting here a little mind blown because really you shot some of our family lore out of the water. But thank goodness, it's still, yes, okay, so it's built on the same foundation. Woo! Did you, because we have always been told, at least I have, the kitchen was the first structure built back after it was burned. Also, did you find any burnt bricks underneath?
So the archaeologists did find burn layers in their excavations under there. I haven't seen it, but I read their report, and they definitely talk about it. So the evidence of the burning of the house is there. And they theorize, and again, this is another reason we need more archaeological work, that there may have been another burning incident, which could be why the kitchen gets replaced. I mean, kitchen fires are not unusual. So, yeah, again, some more archaeology would be great, but they did turn up that evidence. So
someone wrote related to that online. Why was no fire scorching found on the foundation under the kitchen?
That's pretty ephemeral, and when you think everything's burning up, the odds of you getting a whole lot of burning on your stone, unlikely. Then if we're sitting unrebuilt for close to 20 or 15 years after the fire occurs, that's a lot of time for charring to wear off. Okay. But they are finding this char layer in the ground archaeologically. You had one in the back?
Oh, I was just going to ask about a kitchen fire.
Oh, okay. Yep. So yeah, honestly, that might be our best solution to why we've got such a substantial redo in the kitchen wing in the mid-19th century. But again, this could be a great time to dig a little bit deeper into archival records. Are there any newspaper articles referring to a fire at North Point or anything like that? That could be interesting.
So it would be really interesting to figure out where they were where did they live for 30
that's
years?
That's the big question there.
I believe what my father used to say, A. Morris Todd Jr., was that during the time, excuse me, my husband's calling me, we'll chat with him, that he would say that where did they go when they turned the house over to the militia? So he always said that, that the family went north. They went to other Todds in Baltimore County, maybe Harford County, and stayed with them during this time. Cousins, the Ridgeleys, perhaps some stayed at Hampton Mansion. But that's what it was always supposed to, maybe they just stayed there. Unfortunately, we just don't have those records.
Exactly.
Um,
I would
yeah.
love to know.
We have so many records post-fire, but not a lot around that time, obviously. So that's what we were always told.
Mhm.
That's where they went, which would make sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
And there is still a possibility of some temporary structure on the property, but whatever it was ephemeral, and we've not seen any remnants of it.
So, from the information you just gave, we're gonna be editing our narrative.
Exactly.
I don't even know.
Just when you think you have it all figured out.
Our ancestors out there, they were watching down there like, what?
The biggest question mark were the assessments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of blows everything out of the water about the rebuild.
Yeah.
For the value to go down so long, and I don't remember the date, but it was
Yeah.
at least 20 years after what we're saying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well,
So-
yeah,
You need to print that out.
Yeah, we do.
10 years after.
And this was all in, I mean, both of the previous reports I referenced at the front, they both were looking at the same information. And I think it's kind of interesting, they both came to very different conclusions based on this same evidence. So, I think everyone is still pretty confident in there being this major improvement campaign in the 30s and early 40s. There was still some positing that perhaps that $150 could represent a rebuilding campaign, but I'm just not seeing it myself. You know, yeah, there are plenty of middle-class farmers that have improvements valued less than $150. I mean, that's not unheard of, but to see that steady tick down over the years, I think is
Well,
pretty
it's also
clear.
interesting that you said in the 1798 they noted that it was, what did you say, in
Yeah,
ruins? It
yeah,
Yeah.
in very poor. I forget what their exact quote was, but yes.
was, wow.
And I thought the interesting thing was even on the damage report claim, they even cite that it was recently improved. So you know, Todd the Fifth, or Thomas Todd the Fifth that dies in 1798. You know, it's split up between his children. You know, I'm sure they're trying to figure out who gets what, and it takes 10 years or so, and then right before this occurs, I assume Bernard is out here making improvements to the farm, trying to get back into working order, which would jive with what they claimed on the worksheets there for the damage claim. But any other questions? Yeah.
So in the kitchen addition, or not addition now, but the second floor, you know, the original wood shake shingle roof was covered over
Yeah.
at some point in construction.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think that was done? What?
So, if the timeline is working out, and that is a circa 1850 to 1855 rebuild of the kitchen wing, that's probably your 1855 roof. I mean, usually you can expect about 50 years out of a wood shingle roof, especially good old-fashioned wood shingles. And if this is going on right around 1905, 1907, those shingles are very worn when you look at them. They've taken some weather, so I think that's probably its original roof from construction in the 1850s.
Great.
Will you walk us around?
Yeah, let's do
I
it.
would love that.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah, that was really good. Wow. Let's continue to get over all this. It's like, you know, reverse, rewind.
We're gonna just close the video.
Yeah.